Greetings and welcome to our very first webcast, our live webcast for Project Endeavor. My name is Robert Cooper, and I'm excited to present to you today on video etiquette. Video etiquette. What is it? This is something that we often take for granted. We assume we know. It's things that people use all the time. People are very familiar with it, but in actuality, there are still many people that don't know about video etiquette. You can use video through webcams, maybe through video phones or through other devices, and it could be on one-on-one situations or in group situations, or a video session that could be provided through VRI, video remote interpreting. So I'll talk a little bit more about the usage of video communications in the next moment. So which will we be using? Which do we cover? And I'll talk about general applications and general situations. Let's open up with the very first one, video phones. You know, a lot of times we use video phones for one-on-one communication with family and friends, people who also have similar video phones. But in the beginning, it was originally created for VRS, or video relay services, for interpreters. And now we see a lot more usage for VRI applications as well. There's video cams or webcams where they can be attached to the top of your monitor screen or your laptop. And in some of the newer devices, they're built right in. If you don't have something like that, and you need software, feel free to visit your VRS provider so that you can use that software. And you can use it for vlogs. You can use it for a number of different things. Maybe it's Skype or Uvu or NetMeeting or other software that you can use, download. Maybe the Polycom units or the Nefsys can be used where you can use it for multiple connections all at the same time, simultaneously. There's video conferencing, which has changed the way that the public uses video phones. It's not just for one-on-one, but also for group sessions and group settings. So a lot more people are beginning to use this in a variety of different ways for different kinds of services and meetings to provide things in the community and to get people together from long distances. So let's talk about some of the basics of video etiquette. You know, oftentimes we're so used to using it, we take so many things for granted, and we forget that there are appropriate things that we should be cognizant of and how we might want to use video communications to be effective. Some of the basics are things like this. Obviously, the first that comes to mind is your appearance, what you look like when you first are connected on video. It's all based on what your appearance is, what you look like, your hair, your posture, the fact that you may want to make sure you look nice. If you're disheveled, it's going to set the tone for the meeting. And just imagine an interpreter. They often try to personify what the individuals look like that they're interpreting for, just like they do for the hearing person on the other end. They try to give you an idea what that person may look like or act like based on their voice. And that would be the same vice versa. So dress appropriately and make a good impression. Clothing, that's another issue. Would it be appropriate to be on video phone with a robe or maybe a shirt tie and a suit coat? And maybe the pattern of your clothing and what they look like. Sometimes it's hard to look at your signs and read your signs if the pattern on your shirt is not conducive to that. If you wear a white shirt, for example, it's very difficult to see the contrast of your skin color. If you wear orange or red, sometimes that's very difficult to differentiate if people have visual impairments. So again, stripes and plaids can be very difficult. If you have distractions such as a lot of cleavage or maybe something around your neck like feathers, or maybe you're wearing a bathing suit, or maybe you're shirtless and have a hairy chest, you don't want to use that kind of clothing for a video phone interpreting situation. Imagine what you might want to look like for your boss and make a good impression for your boss. Don't forget about things like makeup and jewelry and piercings and scarves or hats and caps and things of this nature. Let's talk a little bit about lighting and background. A lot of it is really visually oriented. So you want to make sure you have the best possible way of not causing problems for the camera and for the person on the other end. So if you don't use appropriate lighting, maybe it's not enough lighting, or maybe it's too bright, too much lighting, that can cause problems. It can cause you to blend into the background. So you want to make sure that the background itself is contrasting enough too. You don't want to blend into it. Also, the room setup. Make sure that there's not a window immediately behind you. Otherwise, you might want to make sure that there's nothing distracting. Maybe there's animals outside the window, or maybe it's something like a bookcase, or maybe a screensaver on a monitor behind you. All of these things can be distracting, or a plant that might be behind you. Those things can cause problems. Don't forget about the audio distractions that can often interfere with video communication. Maybe you have your audio feature on and there's dogs barking or people making loud noises in the background. Those can be very distracting. Make sure that the camera is set appropriately at eye level, so that it doesn't look like you're signing down into the camera or up into the camera. Make sure that it's adequately placed, and make sure that the distance is adequate, so that you're not too far away or that you're too far or too close in front of the camera, and that you're within the screenshot and not outside that area, so that you can easily be seen and easily be read with your signing. Making sure that your sign language is very clear. The clarity and clearness of your finger spelling, for example, making sure that the interpreter can understand you, or the other person on the other end can understand you and follow you at a comfortable rate. You don't want to go too fast or too slow, and based on the kind of connection you might have, you might want to make sure you're a bit slower than normal to make sure that they are following you and that there's not pixelation or jerks and things like this that causes pauses and delays due to a technical glitch. Make sure that you have adequate time to take turns back and forth, and make sure that the other person on the other end can follow you and easily understand you. In person, you can easily take all these things into consideration and gauge things, but there are limitations by doing some of these things via video. You may not notice it as much on VRS, but you will see these things on VRI. There are limitations because maybe things aren't always visually noticeable on the screen. So you might be missing a person that might not be in the screenshot. Maybe there's 4 people in the room, but you can only fit 3 of them on screen at the same time. Or if you're taking turns too quickly. Things like this. The relationship that you might have between yourself and the people in the meeting, including the interpreter. If you were there in a live situation, it would be easy to dictate whether or not you're doing things appropriately, or whether things are being facilitated in a very appropriate manner, but this isn't always as easy on video. And sometimes you just have a bad connection. And if that does happen, the best thing to do is to just disconnect and reconnect later. This can be expected from time to time. Maybe it's the network, maybe it's certain settings or features that aren't right, or maybe things just aren't in sync, so you're having a glitch. Here's some additional tips for effective video communication. Being courteous, just to make sure you introduce yourself so that the interpreter knows the finger spelling of your name or how to spell your name. The same is true for others in the group. Just like when you introduce yourself in a large group, you introduce yourself, you tell people who your name are, and that's true for group meetings when everyone is speaking. So maybe some time can be spent just giving the interpreter some context of what the meeting will be about. Maybe making sure that there's a plan to switch off interpreters at the most appropriate time. How you want to stop each other and ask each other to repeat for clarification. If there's a technical glitch, what do we do? How do we, if we have a heated discussion, there may be some limitations that video communication wouldn't be as conducive for. So maybe you would rather have that communication at a later time, and maybe when it's not so heated, so that you can continue a video communication. Some other things to keep in mind. Obviously, we're talking about appropriate usage and rules of engagement for communication. Well, there's the difference between VRS and VRI. Some people mistakenly abuse this because VRS is a substitution for the telephone or TTY, whereas VRI is actually a substitution for a live interpreter You're accessing an interpreter through video, so make sure you use one in the appropriate setting. If you're replacing an interpreter in a meeting and you want to do something in VRI versus VRS, make sure you do it adequately or appropriately. In VRI, those who have paid for community-based interpreting services in the past would also be responsible for paying for VRI, not VRS. So you don't want to use VRS for VRI purposes. The FCC covers the expense of VRS, but not for VRI. And if you don't use it appropriately, you can have a phone conversation and be stopped in the middle of it because the interpreter or someone might be able to stop you and say, well, we can't continue this call because it's no longer a VRS call, it's a VRI call. And that can be a frustrating experience, and you certainly don't want that to happen. If you'd like to email us some questions, feel free to send that to csdlive@c-s-d.org, and we will take your live questions. Let's see here. The first question. What would you do if you have a lousy interpreter? How would you handle that? In VRS, you could easily stop the situation and maybe correct it, asking for clarification, or even ask for a new interpreter. But for VRI, that's not always the case because the interpreter you're assigned is the only one that's available at that given moment. So the best thing to do at that point is to complete the assignment or finish the assignment at that point and just say, well, let's continue this assignment at a later date, to make sure that everyone is adequately included and has adequate access. So you just cut it off at that point and conclude the VRI session. An autofocus. Sometimes some webcams have the feature of an autofocus, which constantly is zooming in and zooming out. If that's something that your camera has, I would recommend turning that feature off. And when you do turn it off, make sure that the focus is set the way you feel comfortable with, and then after that everything should be smooth. Next question. Which is the best provider? Well, I'm assuming Villy's talking about VRS. It could be just based on your own preference, your own experience. The best thing to do is to try a variety of them. There are many different pieces of equipment. If it's a download, there could be different experiences, and maybe there's different interpreters that you prefer. The best thing to do is to try a number of them and find one that you like and then stick with it. For VRI, it's a bit more difficult because you don't know who's going to be assigned. You can maybe sometimes ask for a specific interpreter. If it's a meeting, you may have a bit more of a challenge because there's not as much of a choice. Another question. How is VRS funded? Well, this has to do a little bit with etiquette, I guess, but you have to make sure that VRS is used for its intent, because that's what's paid for by the FCC, because it replaces the telephone. But if it's VRI, whoever has paid for interpreting services in the past, for community-based interpreting, they also are responsible for paying for VRI services and not being billed to the federal government. Hopefully that answers your question. Well, I believe that's it for today. We are out of time, so thank you for joining us for this live webcast, our very first one. We look forward to having some more in the future, and we look forward to having you join us. Thank you.